How is intelligence affected by our faith? How does the mind work differently if you believe or don't believe? So we take a look, for example, at the difference in the way a physicist approaches nature, creation, existence, and the way a person who believes in God approaches physics or nature. Now, the very obvious difference, one of the obvious differences is that if you believe in God, you have different questions and different observations about nature. Where if you don't believe in God, you wouldn't have those observations, you wouldn't have that information. For example, we all know that we have freedom of choice. We don't live by reflex and by impulse and by instinct. We make choices. We are thoughtful creatures. And we can choose what we want to do. Now, a scientist would come along and say, what exactly is this freedom of choice that you have? What does it consist of? And how did you get it? How did this come about? But the scientist is not going to ask, why do we have freedom of choice? Can't ask that question. If you believe in God, and you believe that God created the world with a plan and with a purpose, you're also going to ask, what exactly is freedom of choice? How did we get freedom of choice? But then you're going to ask the additional question, why? Why do we have freedom of choice? And the answer is going to be, because God wants a relationship with us, and if we don't have freedom of choice, it's not much of a relationship if we're programmed. Then God is talking to himself. So in order for God to be able to talk to us and have a relationship with us, we have to have freedom of choice. So here's a very clear difference between the way a believer examines and explores nature and a non-believer examines and explores nature. There's a very fundamental difference. The fundamental difference is, where do you begin? If you're going to examine the world, nature, if you're going to study it, where are you beginning? Are you working from the fact of physical existence, the fact that there is a world, and try to work your way back to where it came from and how and so on? Or are you starting from the beginning and following the progression from creator to creation? It's a completely different view of the world. It's a completely different way of thinking. Let's explore that a little bit. The physicist looks at a piece of wood and he says, what is this? Of course, it's a piece of wood. What is it really? Upon closer examination, what is it? A bunch of molecules. On closer examination, it's atoms. On closer examination, it's subatomic particles. And on closer examination, it disappears. It's gone. It's gone. It's nothing. It's an energy. It's a behavior pattern, or whatever physicists call the physical stuff. So what's happening? He starts off with the fact that there is a piece of wood. He can't question that. That's the assumption. That's the beginning. That's the start. This exists. This is here. Now, what is it? So he's beginning with something that he takes for granted. It's an axiom. We have existence. Now we got to find out more about it. But interestingly, as we find out more about the existence of a physical thing, it starts to exist less and less. Suddenly, under the microscope, it's not what it looks like, it's not what it feels like, it's not what it tastes like, it's a whole different thing. And the deeper we look, the closer we get to what this thing really is, the more it disappears on us. It stops being. So we start off with the assumption that this really is, and as we explore further and further, it becomes less and less existent until we have to wonder, how does it exist at all? Because it's all made out of electrons, and the electrons are all in motion, and there doesn't seem to be any restraints on this motion. The electrons are flying off of this thing constantly. how does it even stay in existence? So the physicist works from what is to what isn't. And in the end, he ends up in a very murky, mysterious, intangible reality that he doesn't know what to make of. Person who believes in God starts the other way around. If you believe that God created the world, then your basic assumption, your primary assumption is that there is nothing besides God. And what is God? God has no definition. God has no properties. He is not governed by any kind of law or rule or limit of any kind at all. What does that mean? The most basic rule of all things is that everything is governed by being and non-being. Either something is or it's not. It's got to be one of the two. It either is or it isn't. It exists or it doesn't exist. It's one of the two. In fact, it did not exist, and then it did exist. So it went from one to the other. But it always has to be one or the other. What do we say about God? Okay, God has no limits. He's not 6 feet tall. He's not very old. He has no limits of time, of space. But does God have that limit that everything else has? He either exists or he doesn't exist. No. God doesn't have that kind of restriction on him either. So you say, well, God exists. No, he doesn't. Oh, you mean he doesn't exist? Well, of course he does. So does he or doesn't he? This is not how you measure God. Does she or doesn't she? That's a different question. And you don't ask that about God, because he has no hairdresser. So can you say God does exist? No. Well, then he doesn't exist. No, that's not true either. God. He's God. And before God created, there was no existence or non-existence. That's only true of created things. So now, let's look at creation from a godly point of view. What does it say in Kabbalah? The Kabbalah says that the first thing that was brought into being, can't even call it created, but the first thing that was brought into being are the 10 attributes. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura. Where did they come from? What are these 10 things? So before we get down to the actual existence of kindness, judgment, compassion, as we know them, before it actually solidifies into these emotions, the 10 attributes are basically 3 phenomena. Because the 10 attributes create 3 pillars: the right column, the left column, and the center column. So Chesed is on the right side, the right arm. Gvura is on the left side, the left arm. So what was the first thing that came into existence when God began creation? The first thing that came into existence are these 3 qualities: positive existence, negative existence, or some kind of a combination of the two. So, what was the first thing that came into existence? Positive, negative, and something in between. Yes, no, maybe. Or yeah, definitely yes, definitely no, a little of each. And those were the original 10 attributes. So what was the first thing God created? A tree? A table? No. The first thing that came into existence is the whole phenomenon of poles. Yes and no. So the first thing that happened was God created existence and non-existence and its combination. Now, these 10 attributes come down a step further. You still have 3 pillars, but everything that exists can be traced back and is therefore governed by another set of 3 pillars. And that is, everything relates to something else in one of three ways. You can't get around it. Can't get away from it. Either I am being me, or I am giving to you, or I am getting from you. Or I'm getting from someone, giving to someone, and in the middle I'm me. So everything is functioning on three pillars at the same time. It is receiving, it is giving, and it is what it is. Everything is that way. So now we have two definitions for existence, and nothing exists yet. There's no table, there's no chair, there's nothing. And already we have a blueprint for existence because we have the most delicate, the most primitive impulses of existence, which is the beginning of all creation. So again, three pillars: existence, non-existence, and the combination. And then everything that exists will either receive from what is above it, it will give to what is below it, and it will be itself in the middle. Everything is that way. A book standing on a shelf. Something put it there. It was carried by something. It now pushes the other book out of the way. So it's affecting the other book, and it's a book. It is what it is. And then finally, there's a third thing. Another set of three. In what way is it affecting or being affected? Constructively or destructively? I don't mean that in a negative sense. I am affected by my teacher, or whatever it is that I'm receiving from. Right? That's one of the directions. I'm receiving. But as I receive from my teacher or from my parents or whatever it is, or from the air, I can receive in one of two ways. Either it is making me bigger, stronger, richer, or it's diminishing me. It's frightening me. It's scaring me off. It's intimidating me. It's humbling me. So either it's building me up or it's taking me down, which can be positive. I mean, it can be a good thing. So here's the third pillar: good, bad, neutral. So now we have 3 times 3. We have existence, non-existence, and it's neutral. We have receiving, giving, and it's neutral. And then we have good and bad, and it's neutral. Everything in existence is governed by these 3 sets. Now we start from that barely existing stuff, and we work our way down towards more concrete existence until we get to a table. So what is the difference between human thinking and godly thinking, or thinking that comes from faith, out of faith? The difference is, which is your starting reality? In human intelligence, the start reality, beginning reality, is what you see, what you feel, what you hear, what you experience. In other words, the end product. And then, being intelligent humans, we try to work our way back from the fact to the origins. We're not going to find out much, because it's hard to know from the fact what the origins were, because the possibilities are endless. So if you start off with the fact of a number 4, and then you want to figure out, how did we get to this number 4? How did this number 4 come about? You say, oh, I know. Somebody added 2 and 2. Got 4. Yeah, that's possible. Somebody could have subtracted 2 from 6. Would have gotten 4. Somebody could have divided 8 in half. Would have gotten 4. Then you start with bigger numbers, It's endless. So to work from the fact to its source is very risky. The godly way of thinking, when you start off with faith, then your view of the world is different. It's not just you believe in something otherworldly. Your world, your existence, tastes differently now. It's got a whole different look to it. It's got a whole different feel to it. Because when you start with the source, and if you get that correct, then the results are predictable. So if you start off with 2 and 2, you know you're going to end up with 4. It's not a guesswork anymore. So when the sages looked at the world, when a tzaddik, a Talmud Chacham, looks at the world, he already knows the plan. So when he sees this, to him, this is the natural outcome of what he always knew. Sometimes the sages predicted what was going to exist. Because knowing the formula, knowing the principles, knowing the origins, sooner or later, it's going to result in a thing that nobody ever saw before. But it'll happen. And he knows this for sure much more confidently, with much greater certainty, than the physicist trying to figure out where the piece of wood came from. Now let's take a look at a human being. We understand human beings very differently. Everything in the human being comes in sets of 3. Chabad, set of 3. The brain works along 3 pillars. The emotions, chesed, gvura, tiferes. Love, hate, compassion. 3 pillars. How do we interact with other people? We think, we speak, and we act. 3 pillars. My mind, generally, is influenced from above. How do I learn something? From somebody who knows more. My emotions influence what's below them. The emotions influence the behavior. So I am receiving and I am affecting. And then there's when I'm neither receiving nor affecting, I'm sleeping. Just being me. Then when I affect people, I can affect them in one of 3 ways. I can either make them comfortable, uncomfortable, or neutral. I can either build them up, tear them down, or leave them alone. Don't tamper. So the number 3 is significant in Torah and in the world because that's how God began. That's the rules that God set out for existence long before anything existed. So we have Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. 3. You know, we could add Yosef and then be 4. Add Moshe, it'll be 5. Why do we stop at 3? Because Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they are the pillars of the world. Each one represents one of the 3 pillars of existence. And that's why they are in fact called the fathers of the world. Avos ha'olam, the fathers of the world. So you see the difference, or the resulting difference, between a person who has faith, or the person who doesn't, or the person before he has faith, and the person after he gains faith. The difference is not only in his relationship with God. Obviously, that's going to be different. His difference is also in his relationship to his world, to the physical universe, to himself, to the human condition. Everything looks different. So this is one of the ways in which faith is drawn down and applied to the mind and to the world to earth. So bringing God down to earth involves looking at the world through the eyes of faith. Now, most people would assume looking at the world through the eyes of faith means not being very realistic. That's what we assume faith does to people. If you don't have faith, then you're pragmatic and you're realistic and you're practical. If you look at the world with faith, then you don't notice what's going on, you don't care, you don't take it too seriously, you tiptoe through the tulips. It's the exact opposite. When you look at the world through the eyes of faith or belief, you see the world much more clearly, much more realistically. You see what the world truly is, which you cannot get if you're starting from the bottom and trying to work your way back. So the Rebbe, somebody once asked the Rebbe why he's interested in science, why he studied science. Because, you're a religious Jew, what do you need with science? So the Rebbe's answer was, it's precisely because you're a religious Jew that you take an interest in science. Because as a religious Jew, you are curious about everything God does. And you want to understand God in all his ways. So there is nothing in God's world that isn't interesting to you or significant to you if you believe in God and want to have a relationship with him. So it's the exact opposite of the popular notion that if you have a relationship with God, you don't want and you can't have any relationship with earth. You have to deny earth in order to have a relationship with God. That's the furthest thing from the truth. So it'd be very nice if the physicist would consult with the Kabbalist, the true Kabbalist, not the carnival type, in order to understand the universe better. Because if we can combine the two, the observations that are made by looking at the finished product and trying to detect its origins, and starting from the top, from the original beginnings of existence, and working our way to the result, if we can combine the two, who knows what kind of potential this world has that we haven't tapped yet. And that's why one of the things about the coming of Mashiach is that when Mashiach comes, the earth will produce such incredible wealth that delicacies will be so common that nobody will be interested anymore. So the things that we are chasing, the things that we long for today, because it's hard to get, will be so abundant that we won't even want it anymore. And who knows about this fabulous potential that the earth has? Not the physicist. He believes the world's running out. Soon there'll be no water, the sun will shut down. But the sages, who supposedly had their head in the clouds, they appreciated Earth's potential much better. And so if they say the Earth has a greater potential, they're probably right, because they're starting from the top. So their conclusions are much more reliable. This make sense? You can talk now. Now, either it does make sense, or it doesn't make sense, or something in between. It's got to be one. Yes, no, or maybe.
Yes, it does. Didn't the Rambam combine spirituality and science?
Well, you can put it that way. The Rambam combined spirituality and science. Or the Rambam was a tzaddik. He didn't care for spirituality and he didn't care for science. He just knew the truth. Yes. And to him, the truth is neither spiritual nor science.
Because a lot of the theories that he left around, I learned in school before he came to live.
Yes.
But in order, you have to have the knowledge of it in order to start with that kind of faith. Like, you have to know that it's 1 to 4, and you have to know that it's 2 and 2. You have to know that. So, isn't faith not knowing? Isn't faith?
No, we're talking about what happens to your knowledge after you have faith. In other words, You believe that God created the world. Okay, that's your faith. Now what?
Oh, so it doesn't make a difference then. Why should it make a difference if you believe God created the world?
That's right.
It'll make a difference if you know. It'll make a difference if you know that it starts with 3 pillars or that there's existence in that.
Oh, yeah, that you know.
That will help. That the knowledge will help, but the faith won't help. The faith won't help you, and the knowledge will help.
The fact that you begin with, which you cannot prove, that's true on both ends. The scientist begins with a fact that he can't explain. There is a piece of wood, that's it. That causes him to use his mind a certain way. So if you start off with a certain truth, that determines how you're going to think and what you're going to think. If you start off with a different truth, then your mind works along a different path. You think differently. So if you start off with the truth that the world exists, and let's see whether it has a creator, then your mind is going to work one way. If you start off with the truth, there is a creator, now let's see how creation came into existence, then your mind is going to work a different way.
So you're going to look for those answers. So you don't have to be a believer to look for those answers. You have to be a philosopher. A philosopher asks why. A believer, if anything, wouldn't really. I mean, maybe. Right.
There are philosophers who are believers, and there are philosophers who are not believers. They are going to examine the world differently because your basic assumption is different. Now, let's add one more detail to this philosophy. If God is not governed by existence or non-existence, by being or non-being, he's not governed by receiving or giving, and he's not governed by good or bad, how did it all begin? We just explained what began. The first thing God created were 3 notions. The notion of existence, of non-existence, and of the combination. That's what he created. But how? Is it correct to say, would you accept or reject the following statement? God is a creator. God is the creator, but he's not a creator. Why? Because he didn't create anything else? He only created one world?
You put where you put an example, and say he's a creator, then you leave room for there to be other creators.
Okay, so is it correct to say God is the only creator? There's a problem with that. When you say he is a creator, it means he must create. A creator must create. If that's what he is, if he's a creator and he doesn't create, maybe he's not feeling well. Maybe he got stuck in traffic. I mean, what happened? He's a creator. And he's not creating. Something went wrong. Because a creator must create. Pretty much the same way that water must flow. If water doesn't flow, it's a miracle. So if we say God is a creator, what you're saying is that he is programmed to create. He's built to create. To say God is a creator implies that God had to create. And that's why we cannot call God a creator. He did create, but he's not a creator. In other words, he created out of nothing. So you understand what it means when we say the world was created out of nothing? It doesn't mean God had no tools to work with. God created the world out of nothing because he's not a creator. So it's not like he is geared to creating, he's built to create. No, he's not. So what happened? He created. Out of what? Out of nothing. He's not even a creator. Chickens lay eggs. Not because they choose to, but because they're chickens. God created a world. Oh, he's a creator. No, he's not a creator. God created the chicken. He's a farmer. No, he's not a farmer. See, I mean, logically, you would say God brought existence. Then God must exist. No. You see, you can't capture God that way. You can't trap him. So God makes things exist. Well, then he must exist. No, he mustn't exist. Oh, you mean he doesn't exist? No, he can't not exist. Well, then he does exist. No. Existing and not existing, this is part of what he created. And he didn't create it because he had to, because he's geared that way. He created it. Why? Because he wanted to. And that's why it is so significant and meaningful when we say all that God desired, he created. Kol asher chafetz Hashem asa. Or in Kabbalah language, when it arose in God's will to create the world. That's so instructive. That's so enlightening. It's not like, oh yeah, he wanted to create. It's saying much more than that. The only reason creation came to be is because he wanted to. Not because he's geared that way, not because he had to, not because that's what he does. It's not what he does. Then how? It arose in his will. But here also we have to be careful. In a human being, what does it mean you want something? Huh?
Well, it's kind of like a lack of something.
All right. But aside from the lack, what does it mean you want something?
You don't have
There's something you want. No. There is something that you want.
It exists.
it exists separately.
But that doesn't apply to God. So what does it mean? God wanted to create the world. You mean there was a world and he wanted to create it? No, there wasn't a world. So what did he want? What did he want? He wanted a relationship. You mean there's a relationship and he wants one of those? No. So when we say God wanted, it's a whole different kind of want. What does it mean he wanted? He wanted what? And if he wanted it, then it is more powerful than him. Whatever it is. And that's why the Christian notion of saying God is love, that's idolatry. You're not worshiping God, you're worshiping love. And why do you believe that God is love? Because you prefer love to God. Otherwise, why would it thrill you to define God as love? Because love, you know. God, who knows? So we say, God is love. Oh, love. Yeah, I know love. I like love. So this God is love? Okay, he's my God. You're not believing in God, you're believing in love. You're worshiping love, not God. So just by saying, God created us because he loves to do us favors, then there's something more powerful than him. And why are we worshiping him? Let's worship what he worships. And if he is so drawn to relationship and to love and to kindness, well, then he worships kindness. Let's worship kindness, not him. So what does it mean God wanted? That's why Kabbalah language is very precise. It arose in God's will. What does that mean? It arose in his will? He wanted. He started to want. When he decided to want, but it arose in God's will, what is that saying? It's saying that God's will is original. It's not a reaction to something. Our will is a reaction. There is something you're missing. There is something you like. There's something that appeals to you. There's something that convinces you of its importance, so now you want it. So in a sense, you didn't choose it. It chose you. You didn't pick it. It picked you and said, come here. You need me. You want me. Because I'm important to you. But God's will is his own. He wants. So when a human being wants something, he's going down from himself to something. But in God, his will arose. It arose in God's will to create the world.
Is his will something from nothing also? Is his will also something from nothing?
Right.
What's the question?
His will is also something from nothing. Let's put it another way. As soon as you say will, you're actually talking about three things. When I say I want, already I'm talking three things. I, the thing I want, and the attraction. So there are three things that are already existing. If I want, there's what I want, there's who wants, that's me, and then there is the attraction or the desire for the object that is desired. At the beginning of creation, that can't be. So when we say God wanted to create the world, then you say, well, so there's a world, at least in principle. Then there's God, and then there's God's desire to make this world exist. But then already three things exist, and that can't be. I mean, that's not the start. Eventually, that's what happens. But we're talking about how it began. So, well, it all began with God's will. No, that's already three things. How would we describe, you see something, you like it. You like it. You'd love to have one of those, but right now you're busy. So you're not going to act on your will. You know, someday when you got some free time, you'd love to go. That's kind of a preliminary will. The thing itself doesn't move you. And the proof is, you're not reaching out for it. But now that you've seen it, yeah, that would be nice to have one of those. So it's not actually a will. You don't actually want it. Because it is still very vague in your world. It's not real to you. You've seen it, it looks good, you'll pursue it later. So do you want it or don't you want it? It's a different kind of want. It's not that you actually want it, but now it's wantable. I just made up that word, by the way. Don't look it up in a dictionary. Before you saw it, you were unaware of it. Now that you've seen it, you are aware. It still doesn't exist in your world, but there's an awareness, a positive awareness. It has become desirable, but you don't desire it right now. So there is no desire. There's just a desirableness. I just made up that word. But in Hebrew, there are words for this. In Hebrew, there's the word ratzon, which means will. There's also a word mirutza. The word mirutza means it pleases me. So if it pleases me, do I want it? No, not yet. Maybe. But right now, it's appealing. It's not yet desirable, if you want to use that, but it's appealing. So now, I am positively disposed towards it. I'm not going to chase it. So it's like an early stage will. Do I actually want it? No. But if I would have it, would I like it? Yes. So it is already pleasing to me, not so attractive that I'm going to run. It's not drawing me, but it pleases me. Again, what is the difference? The difference is that if it's drawing me, then it is very real and I'm reacting to it. If it merely pleases me, that's my response. That's about me. And that's why I'm not going to run after it. It doesn't really exist by itself yet. Right now it just exists in my acceptance. In other words, there is a kind of a will that describes me and not the thing I want. And that's why it's possible that the thing pleases me, but I'll never do it. Because it's not about it, it's about me. Here's a vulgar example. A woman is walking down the street and some guy whistles at her. And she thinks, oh, he likes me. No, he doesn't like you. He whistles at everyone. But it's not about you. That's what men do. We've perfected a whistle. I mean, that's it. So there's a difference between I want this or that's the kind of thing I like. I don't want it. I'm not going to chase it. I'm not threatening it. In other words, it doesn't have that kind of power over me. I'm enjoying it because that's me, not because of it. So, do I want it or don't I want it? In this case, I want it. I don't want it. I want it. It's about me, it's not about it. Or in different words, I am using it, it's not using me. I'm toying with it. When I want something, it's toying with me. So what does it mean, God wanted to create the world? Well, in the early stage, he didn't actually want to create the world because he is infinite, truly infinite, because all things are possible for him. So one of the things that was okay with him was creating a world. But the world didn't exist. Even his desire didn't exist. It's not like he had a desire to create the world. It was just that creating a world, yeah, it's one of the things he can do. That's okay with him. Does he want it? Not yet. Does it exist? Certainly not. It's just one of the many things he can do. That's a later stage. Once it arose in God's will to create the world, then it was a desire. So the desire is already a stage in creation, not the earliest beginnings. Or in different words, what does it mean he desired it? Same thing as with will. There's an actual desire because you're drawn by the thing that you desire, and then there's the kind of desire where it's not about it, it's just about me. I'm disposed towards it, yeah, that's me.
So there was no world, there was no vision of anything. That's the difference between whenever a person, human being, desires or wants something, there has to already be the object, there has to be in existence, so we wouldn't know what we were desiring in the world. But that's the difference. I mean, Hashem was able to desire and want something, actually, it didn't have to be to have the object, it was about just his will, his desire.
And it's not only that God desired something and it didn't have to be. God desired it and it couldn't be. It couldn't even exist at that stage. So here's a fascinating thought. Before God created the world did not exist. Not existing is already a creation. Because there's existing and there's non-existing. See, that's why when you say, in the beginning, the world did not exist. Not correct. And that's why you will not find such a statement in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, anywhere. In the beginning, nothing existed. No. In the beginning, there was God. There was just God. What wasn't there? Non-existence. There was no non-existence. because non-existence is the flip side of existence. So even that didn't exist. So how do you describe those days? The only way to describe it is by saying, there was God. There was God. And what wasn't there? There wasn't any yes, there wasn't any no. What about the world? Did it exist? It didn't exist, and it didn't not exist. So what does it mean the world came out of nothing? The world came out of nothing, not even non-existence. That make any sense? It's almost like saying, in the beginning, the world was non-existent. The what? What was non-existent? See, to say non-existent, you're already talking about something. Before the creation, there was nothing.
Wasn't nothing created? Was it nothing created?
That's why the only way to say it is, in the beginning, there was God. And what else? And nothing else.
We don't say Yeshua. We don't say something from godliness. It says something from nothing.
Right.
So how do you try and Yeshua ayin?
From nothing. But when we say nothing, we mean not even non-existence.
Why don't we say Yeshua? Why don't we say something from Yeshua?
Why don't we say H9 test and then why don't we phrase differently? We have to be explained.
That's another subject. Hold up on that. There are two expressions concerning God's uniqueness. There's an expression we say in the Aleinu, Ein Oid, Hu Elokeinu, Ein Oid. There's another place where it says, God is Ein Oid Milvade. There is nothing besides him. Why two expressions? Because when you say there was nothing besides him, that's not the whole story. Besides? What's besides? When you say there was nothing besides him, you're excluding something. There was nothing beside him. If you have to exclude, then you're talking already about some stage of creation where there is something to exclude. When you're talking the earliest stages, it's Ein Oid. There's nothing to exclude. So you can't even say there's nothing besides him. Besides him? What is that? So when you say, there was God and no one else. No one? No one. Even one. But you have to exclude it. Like saying it was non-existent. Well, then that's not the beginning of history. The beginning of history is when there's nothing to exclude. There's nothing to say it's non-existent. Actually, when you look at the world this way, you get a whole new respect for the world. God went through all of that to create this world. And it all began as a completely personal thing in God. He wanted, and it didn't even exist. Doesn't that mean that he wanted it very, very much? He didn't even need it to appeal to him, and he already wanted it. So on the one hand, it's telling you how non-existent, how insignificant the world is. It didn't appeal to God. God wanted it. Maybe there isn't even anything appealing to the world. Didn't matter. God wanted it. So on the one hand, it's saying the world has really no appeal, has no purpose, no importance, no function, no value. Why then does it exist? Something about God. Not something about the world, something about God. So it's telling us that the world is so insignificant. And on the other hand, so it's something about God, and God has this something about creation. And he's not even a creator? So when we say, for example, God created the world for a purpose. What does it mean for a purpose? It means just creating a world is not justified. For a purpose means there's got to be some purpose. You can't just have a world. What's that? So the world exists not by its own merit. It exists because of the purpose that God sees in it. So again, that makes it sound like the world is not that important. Or not important at all. Were it not for the purpose, none of this would exist at all. On the other hand, it is God's purpose that this world fulfills. What could be more awesome than that? So in the final analysis, looking at the world through this perspective makes the world far more valuable than the world is to the physicist. So Mr. Einstein once said that anybody who has never contemplated the cosmos and was overcome with awe for the Creator isn't really alive. Something like that. Or being overcome with awe at the greatness of the Creator, that is the essence of religious experience. Tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg. That's the best a person can do when he's working his way from the bottom up. So isn't it ironic? If you're a secular person, a man of the world, you don't believe in God and any kind of hocus pocus stuff, you're a scientist, you like to be able to prove things, like to be able to test things, you're a realist, and you start examining this real physical world, you start to lose respect for it. Wood is not really wood. Molecule is not really a molecule. An atom is not really an atom. An electron, who knows what that is, won't stand still to take a picture. So eventually, this world is not real. You lose respect for it. And maybe gain respect for the Creator. Okay. But you lose respect for the creation. But if you start with the Creator, and you recognize that the world is totally insignificant and did not exist even enough to have to say it's non-existent, as you study, you gain more and more respect for this world. And in the end, this world is the only thing that counts. Isn't that ironic?